many moons ago. Started in software development and did some architecture and stuff, and then some BA work. And I was a slightly overconfident software developer slash BA that was tasked with doing an upgrade of Sitecore from version 4 to whatever it was at the next one. There's a major or minor, I don't know. But we got a quote from somebody from an agency, and it was way too high, I thought, because I'm like, oh, come on. It's an upgrade. How hard can it be? It's .NET. How hard can it be? And of course, those of you who might have used Sitecore back in the day around those versions will know that there was a lot more to it than overconfident .NET developers knew. And the only thing that saved my hide, because we did manage to deliver that upgrade on time and budget, the only thing that really saved my hide was that there were people, some of them on the call here in the Sitecore community, that were posting, making blog posts about how to deal with this issue and that. And one of them that was constantly posting stuff and helping people was this man, John West, who I later discovered was then the CTO of Sitecore at some point in time, but was just always on it with regards to sharing knowledge. And I think that was one of the things I just loved about the Sitecore community in general. And so it's a pleasure to have John with us here today. We've stayed close. I call myself a collector of people, and John is one of the ones that I try to stay close with over the years. And John sometimes calls himself a developer of people as well. I like to collect them, and I think John tries to make something of them, sometimes by sharing knowledge and so forth. But John, it's nice to have you here. Would love to know a little bit more about you. How did you get into tech? Where are you right now? How did you get into tech? What is this Sitecore thing? How did that happen? Tell us a little bit about that journey from little John in wherever you are from to CTO of Sitecore.
So I'm 1973 and from California. And so I was really lucky at the time when my brain was really developing was the time when personal computers were becoming practical for home use. So I got a Commodore 64 when I was about 11. My brothers and I pooled our Christmas gift money together and bought this thing. And in those days, you also needed a TV to plug your computer into. So we were constantly buying used black and white TVs to replace the last one that broke. And my brothers were primarily playing video games and not really that interested in the computer, where I was reading the schematics and the documentation and programming. And we did do the kind of thing of one brother reads the machine language code and the other one types it into the machine and checks the CRCs. And that whole computing was so much different back then.
Yeah.
So it was more of a hobby or something fun for me to do. And then I lost track of it during college. I studied all sorts of things, psychology primarily. And I was still reading books I was practicing assembly language and reading books on C and C++, but I didn't really see the business opportunity. I didn't think I was smart enough. I thought computer was all about math, and I'm not a math guy. I thought it was about electronics, and I'm not an electronic an EE. So I just didn't see an opportunity for myself in it. And my goal was actually to use technology for education. So I was in developmental psychology and child development and thinking about how to apply technology to scale education or to benefit education. And over time, I've realized that maybe technology is not the best way to educate people. There's an extent that it's necessary, but anyway. So I had an incredible opportunity that came up in 1996. One of my professors offered me a job at a consultancy that he ran on the side, and then that consultancy lost its customers, and their biggest customer made offers to all the employees to move to Silicon Valley. So I went to Silicon Valley and started working for Xilinx, which nobody, and if you've worked with,
yeah, I don't. The name is familiar, but I'm not sure what do they do.
So they make field programmable gate arrays, which is a specialized kind of processor. So I was working in the silicon industry and working with software, but I was doing a technology called electronic data interchange. And so this was before XML and before JSON, there were these document standards for a purchase order or invoice or point of sale report, inventory report, test results, all those kind of things. And there were these standards, and these standards still exist and are still in use. So in that position, electronic data interchange is a conduit for every piece of digital information in the organization. It's every system interacts with every business partner and every warehouse. Everything is flowing through EDI, and it's the lifeblood of the organization. And what that did for me was gave me exposure to every different aspect of the business. I mean, for inventory, accounts receivable, accounts payable, shipment notice of it. Basically, every system in a billion-dollar silicon company, I was responsible for interfacing with that system and requirements analysis and implementation. And honestly, this is the period of my career where I did some of my best work. I did, like, architecturally came up with some designs and implementation patterns that just saved so much money and paper and network and everything else. So that was the precursor to what we now call electronic commerce. So we were doing electronic commerce in the 80s. We just didn't use the internet. We used value-added dial-up networks, and we used other technologies and not HTTP. And that gave me an understanding of the business and technology. And these systems had to be bulletproof, because if there was an error, I would get paged at 4 a.m. to deal with it. That's the situation you don't want to be in. So I learned to develop robust architectural solutions and then to code to be very defensive. And then after about 3 years of doing that, I think I got bored and wanted to go back to school. And I did go back to school for a little while, but then school was boring too, because industry moves so much faster than education. And so I went back into industry doing EDI again, but this was when the dot-com period happened. So this opportunity to do web content management with this product suite called Interwoven came up, and I followed it. And I had, again, no experience with content management, but I saw the opportunity and followed it. And this was as the dot-com was collapsing. I spent about 4 or 5 years working with Interwoven, doing so I had been a full-time employee at Xilinx, and when I moved to Interwoven, I started doing consulting. So in our industry, there's really a triangle, which is the organization implementing the solution, the vendor selling the solution, and the consultancy or the consultants that help the customer implement the solution. So this was my second pivot. My second position was, first I had worked for the organization, and now I was working for consultancies and seeing the difference there. And I spent about 5 years consulting for Interwoven and teaching training and all of those kind of things. And then I was working for Stanford hospitals and clinics in Silicon Valley, and they had a Interwoven implementation, but Interwoven was dying at this point, and they were looking for a next generation solution. By this time,
that's the introduction into the whole WCMX. It's the WCMS, and it's funny. There's also, with the electronic data interchange, put a pin in that for later. I see a thread between that and the orchestration of enterprise data that maybe stuck with you a little bit too. So it's funny how that background just leads to the next thing. But yeah, Interwoven was your introduction into WCMS.
Yes. No, and I learned so much in that experience. So being a consultant, so I had previously worked with various different types of business systems, but being a consultant, you work with various different kinds of industries. So I was working for John Deere or Intel or US Bank or Stanford hospitals and clinics. So all of these different verticals, I started to get experience with all of those. And then again, the Interwoven was drying up, the business was drying up, and I was tired of the technology, and I liked .NET. So I had done an Interwoven project at Intel, and they had paid me basically to learn C# and when C# was brand new. And I really liked .NET. I'm always looking for paradigm shifts in our industry, because that's where the opportunities are. So like the HTTP protocols were a paradigm shift that enabled at least an order of magnitude increase in productivity and what we can do with technology. SQL is one of those paradigms. XML JSON is one of those paradigms. I'm always looking for those kinds of pivots. And I felt that Java had not been that pivot for me. It didn't really pay off as a productivity engine, but .NET definitely did. Yeah. And it's very native to me. And so I loved it, and I wanted to work with it. Stanford hired me to review available web content management replacements for Interwoven, and that's when I came across Sitecore. So Sitecore was a small Danish company. I think that year their revenue was probably less than 30 million. And I contacted the owners of the USA organization and said, I don't really care whether Stanford uses your technology or not. I want to work with your technology. And how do I come on board?
What about it got your attention?
90% of the work that I had done on all of my previous WCM projects would have been avoided if I had Sitecore. So that's an order of magnitude increase in productivity for me. And one of the things that's like one of the paradigm shifts in Sitecore is instead of looking at the website as a file system, you look at it as a document tree or an XML tree or an object tree. And it's all integrated into one API as opposed to all these files scattered all over the place, which is how Interwoven had worked, or like CGI bin kind of stuff, or really the way application servers were implemented back then was not making me happy. And .NET was the ASP.NET was the first application server, not classic ASP, but ASP.NET was the first application server where I said, this is the right correct way to do things. And at the time, it was probably one of the better. It's become not agile and a little bit difficult to maintain .NET solutions, and there's been a lot of changes. So I wouldn't necessarily implement a web solution with .NET today, but in the 2000s, it was probably the right technology, and maybe through 2015. I'm not a huge fan of Jamstack and stuff like that. I prefer back-end technologies. I prefer compile time error detection. I prefer a lot of things that go into proper software engineering as opposed to let's get a solution out the door really quickly.
For the benefit of those who are not the insiders on that, Jamstack. What's Jamstack about?
Okay, so if you're not a software developer, you may not realize that there are a lot of software developers that really disrespect JavaScript because it's not, I don't want to get into the details, but it's not a rigorous engineering language the way other languages. It's a scripting language that's evolved into a programming language. So it's not the right technology for everything. And Jamstack is using JavaScript everywhere. So instead of, in the past, we might build the backend with .NET or Java or those kind of things. And in a Jamstack application, we're trying to build the backend with JavaScript and then JavaScript on the front end. And JavaScript's great on the front end. There's no real alternative. But on the back end, for me, JavaScript is not an enterprise technology. And I'm probably offending some people by saying that, but it's my opinion of after being in this industry for 30 years and 40 years programming, it's just not the right language for enterprise applications for me.
Yeah, and that when we talk about Jamstack, we're skipping one step. So we were over here when we discovered the Sitecore and Interwoven, sorry, from Interwoven over to Sitecore. And because of that productivity gain that you got from Sitecore, because there's so much plumbing that's already was done for you there, that was attractive to you. And then you decided, you called up the Sitecore people, decided you're going to join them.
I should mention that in my time at Interwoven, I was also posting extensively on their developer network forum. So the same kind of role that I ended up doing at Sitecore, I had been doing for free for Interwoven. And I actually I was in there, I don't remember what the name of the program was, but they had something like the MV Most Valuable Professional Program. And I got an award, a trophy from Interwoven and things like that. So my thing is always about enabling other developers. I don't know why, but I don't really have my own goals. My goals are to empower other people. Like I'm doing fine. I don't need anything from anybody, but I see other people struggling and my goal is to assist them. And over time, that's really shifted to wanting to assist people with greater challenges or less opportunities in life. 20 years ago, honestly, in our industry, it was all white guys. Like when I was teaching classes for Interwoven, it was really rare for there to be a woman in the class or anybody of any other culture. And I was traveling to Europe to teach classes, and it was the same everywhere I went. And I felt like something was wrong, and I still don't know how we address that. But my goal is to empower a greater community in our industry that is not hegemonious, just one or two cultures. Because the other part is that you end up working with a lot of people from India, and I'm nothing against any of these cultures, but it's like there are really only two primary cultures in our industry, and it's a limitation, and it's something that it makes me uncomfortable to some extent.
That's one detour I want to follow just for a second, because I think we've stayed close because of some of that thinking as well. And I see exactly that. There's also this opportunity. First of all, it makes good business sense because so many of these really talented, bright people are not paid to the same level as somebody in North America or Europe, and now India's coming up as well. But those opportunities, it just makes good sense, business, sociological sense for that to happen. And that's part of the reason why we're doing the Alliance the way that we are. But I suspect it's probably part of the reason as well that you're doing Orchex the way. How do we get from you joining Sitecore, and I still want to hear about the CTO journey and your exit, but how do we get from Sitecore all the way to this Orchex thing, and how are those things different? If you want to comment on the other kind of geopolitical, social aspect of it, you can as well. Because
On the geopolitical, social aspect of it, I would just say that our industry is dangerous when it's just white tech bros. And we can all see what's happening in the world today as a result of that. So we cannot let that continue. That has to be reversed. In terms of my arc from consultant to CTO at Sitecore, so like I said, there's a triangle, which is the organization implementing the solution, the consultancy assisting with the implementation, and the vendor. So now I'm working on the third point of that triangle. So I'm working as the vendor and seeing things from a completely different perspective. And my ethics are probably more important to me than anything else. So in our industry, there's a lot of temptation to do things that are ethically questionable. So at Sitecore, we had a commitment. We're not going to sell our software into the pornography industry or into gambling. And so it was an ethical fit for me. And because my role was, my title was Chief Technology Officer, but my role, what I would call myself is Chief Customer
advocate,
developer advocate. Yeah. I'm not really interested in making money. The company's going to do fine. If the company has a good product and people, it's going to do fine. I'm not worried about the company. I'm worried about the customer implementing the solution, and specifically the developer that's going to be responsible for that solution. And I think that developers often get put into a position where they're responsible or they're accountable for a decision that they didn't make. So the organization chooses an enterprise application package, whatever it is, and the developer's responsible for implementing it. They never have enough resources to do the implementation properly. And if something goes wrong, somehow it's their responsibility. So how do we reduce that pressure on developers? Because I know I've been in that position and it's not a pleasant place to live. By communicating with people on the Sitecore Developer Network forums, it was helping to market the product, indicating there's a community here, a helpful community. You don't have to pay for support. You don't have to wait 3 days for a ticket to get filed and all those kind of things. There is a community here that's going to assist you, and it's a positive sharing community. And I think that was actually influential. The first 10 hires at a company set its culture. And so for me to come in at that moment and try and set that as the culture, I think actually shaped Sitecore's course to avoid becoming one of those, we're just about profit. We're just about, and over time, as Sitecore sought external investment, I would say that culture shifted and it became much more of a profit-driven company. And I think that's reversing itself now to some extent.
I see some Sitecore people there who are old OGs as well. And I wonder, you can put up your hand or just say amen or something, but I see Mark Demany here. Nice to see you, Mark. Obviously, Jim Patello, Kariga. Does that ring true with you all about the early days of the Sitecore community in particular? And do you feel that was like part of the driving force in the adoption of the platform early on?
I started in Sitecore in 2010, I believe.
Yeah.
And when you start with a new product, the company that I worked for, I was analyzing the market to see, okay, what kind of products we can add next to the SEL Tridion, as it was called at that time, to cover, let's say, less expensive markets. Sitecore was actually a huge fit. It's easy to onboard. Community is great. I believe even I dreamt about John's blog posts. In the entire SDN community, everybody is helping. When I read John's post, somehow when you knew it something and you read, and then you say, oh man, this guy must be a rocket scientist or something like that. And after a few years, I saw John on stage at some event. And when I saw John, I thought, this is really a simple, humble man that just knows his thing. And
stop! You're going to embarrass him now. You're going to embarrass him. I'm going to stop because this guy, he shrinks back anytime you start saying really nice things about. You're still a hack, John. If it's going to make you feel better, there you go.
Yes, he is, and still a rocket scientist. But what I want to say, it's not when you see, for example, people from other departments like sales who are screaming loud and look at me. And John's not that kind of person. So that's what I wanted to say, actually.
Oh, for sure.
How the community started, and I really enjoyed it. And I made my own profits. I learned the product, was able to do things to get money to the company I was working for. So that's it, basically.
And I think, thank you, Jazz. And I think I wanted to say there too, at the same time, that same thing, that attitude about helping as many people as you can also led to you adding value to a lot of people, which then led to the organization being successful.
Exactly.
And so there's not a
Exactly.
disconnect necessarily between doing well while doing good. There doesn't have to be this kind of myopic one way or the other vision of the sector. But John, let's continue from this Sitecore journey.
Blogging is a good topic, though. So what I would do, my memory is terrible. So my blog, I started out, okay, here's a problem that came up. I'm going to forget, so I'm going to blog about it. So instead of trying to remember everything, I would just write about it on my blog.
Yeah.
And then if I saw the same question come up on the forums over and over again, I would prioritize that as a topic for blogging about, so that the next time somebody asked the same question, I could send them a link to a blog post instead of trying to answer the question. And what happened as a result of that is that it worked as a marketing angle. People would be searching for topics in the content management space or web development in general, and they would come to my blog. And then at some point, 25 to 50% of the traffic going to sitecore.net was coming through my blog.
Yeah.
But you do these things because they're the right thing to do, or you think that it's helpful. And then the consequences are not always apparent immediately, but if you do good things, you're going to have good results. And you just have to believe in that and keep going, because you actually never know when success is going to happen. It's right around the corner, and you don't give up.
Oh
you just
my God, I love that,
believe
John.
in something, you just keep going at it.
I love that. And that's what those of you who've been along this journey with me for the last few years will know exactly, that we lean into that big time, because it's also a vision that is, people look at it as either like this capitalist or socialist vision or whatever. And it's not necessarily that dichotomy, because if you have a vision that lasts beyond this quarter or this year end, and you look towards more sustainable world and growth and environment where your organization can succeed, those two things can come together. But John, and I think, by the way, on another front, you talk about these paradigm shifts, these kind of sea changes, right, as being something that you're always looking for in tech. I think, yeah, we also look for those in just the structure of things. I think we're similar in that I tend to look at organizations, societies as systems in many ways as well. And you look for those shifts, and obviously we're in one right now and in need of one. I want to talk about two paradigm shifts that happened now for you. So you served as CTO of Sitecore. It did well. I understand it was valued at about $1 billion when you sold. 2017, 16?
We sold different pieces at different times, but 2016 was when I cashed out completely.
Okay. So when you've left there, and that old, I guess at this point, DXP web content management platform, that thing. And then there was another paradigm shift that I saw you making in a lot of your posts and the technologies that you were following, from that kind of Sitecore model to what people are calling a more composable model. I'd love to understand what that paradigm shift is about, and then why the need for yet another one when you're talking about enterprise orchestration. Perhaps that's that one. And also another paradigm shift, how you're going now from this commercial software to this open source platform. And what does the one have to do with the other? What does this open source paradigm shift have to do with this enterprise orchestration paradigm shift as well?
All right.
By the way, those of you, Bala, nice to see you again from the Sitecore community. Anybody who has questions that you want to raise your hand, you want to put something in the chat. I'll thank Brittany to keep an eye out so that I don't miss anything. But you're welcome to chime in. We've got about half an hour left, and I want this next half an hour, especially when John gets into his very opinionated views around composable and other things. It'd be nice if some other people called bullcrap or challenged in that regard, because that would be a fun conversation. So yeah, yes. Tell me what these paradigm shifts meant, and how does the one composable and open source have to do with the other?
Okay, so there's a lot there. There are like 14 questions in there, I think. With Sitecore, we had what we call a monolithic application. So you have a digital experience platform, which means it's got the web content management piece, it's got analytics and tracking, it's trying to include web forms development tools and some level of search, and it's trying to put every possible feature that an organization might need into one product. And that sounds good and has its advantages, but the organization implementing that solution cannot possibly be a domain expert in all of those fields. So you don't necessarily get the best of breed point solution for each piece. You get what the vendor was able to implement in the timeline that they had, which may or may not be a fit for you. And what happens as a software company gets bigger, from my perspective, is that it becomes less and less technical. Sales and marketing separates from technology more and more. And the kind of story you get from the sales and marketing people starts to separate more and more from the actual technology. So my perspective at Sitecore is that there was this big picture or vision of what a digital experience platform could deliver. And very few customers were actually able to achieve that value because of the implementation hurdles. And it takes much more than coding to make a solution. It takes analysis and understanding and investment and content strategy and so many other pieces. And if you go in and try and sell the software silver bullet, which is what every vendor is always trying to sell, we have a product that's going to solve every possible need that you could possibly have. You're putting that customer at a disadvantage because they'll never actually meet those objectives. And so having gone through this cycle of from the customer to the consultant to the vendor, I started to realize that the vendor and the consultant are basically never working for the customer. It's like when you hire a lawyer. Your lawyer doesn't work for you. Your lawyer works for themselves. They want money. And it's the same thing in our industry. The vendors and the consultants act like they're on the customer's side, but they're really out for themselves. And so this became an ethical issue for me. Also, again, as Sitecore sought the investment capital, it changed the strategy of the company. It was less and less a technology company and more a sales and marketing company. And it's interesting what Mark pointed out in the comments, because this is exactly related to why I left, is we stopped doing things in the best interest of the customer and started doing things only in our own interest. And so that specific documentation site, replacing the Sitecore Developer Network forums, Sitecore basically abandoned this technology that it had sold to its customers, all the Sitecore 5 forums products and things like that, and just admitted that it was all rubbish and there was no upgrade path and that Sitecore itself couldn't upgrade its own software. And then the CEO of the company at the time, who I have a lot of respect and I love all the guys, the founders of Sitecore that I worked with, but we had a disagreement because he wanted to use the Sitecore Experience Accelerator product to build the documentation site and the marketing site and all these things that it was not an appropriate technology for. And so we basically disagreed about that. And then I wouldn't say I was marginalized out, but basically we came to an agreement that I wasn't doing my role as blogging anymore. During some restructurings, they moved me from engineering to marketing. If there's one team I don't belong on, it's marketing.
But it's funny, having known you for a while and we did some work together where you did, when presented with titles, say senior customer advocate, and I'm like, that just makes sense. And it's interesting, and I appreciate this about you, but it doesn't always fly so well in the traditional corporate space where, that you can say, I don't think this approach is right for this solution, just as an engineer and an architect and somebody who wants a good solution for the customer, the user. And that doesn't necessarily always match what the sales or marketing or executive team might want. And that kind of friction is going to happen, but it's what you want in a good friend, right? Somebody who's just going to tell you something just because I think it's the facts and what's good for you, not necessarily what you want to hear. Don't feel bad about that, obviously. And I think you do, because you continue that pattern. So never change on that front. But how did the shift now happen from, and Mark, thanks again for those comments, because I think, John, you're absolutely right, spot on. We're definitely a great community and things just change culturally there. But where was this other paradigm shift now from this monolithic kind of approach that you talked about to composable and now orchestration?
Well, I don't remember exactly what year it was that headless CMS started to become a concept, but Sitecore is not a headless CMS. It's it's a monolithic application. And these companies like Contentful and Content Stack started appearing, which were really lightweight content management solutions, which were service-oriented, which is really the architectural application paradigm of the future, as far as we can see. As far as we can tell, there is no new software engineering pattern that is going to replace composable service-oriented applications in the foreseeable future. Nobody has come up with anything, or at least I haven't seen any indications of it, and AI is not what people are expecting of it. So Sitecore, being in competition with those smaller vendors, generated what I would call FUD materials against composable and against headless content management in general. And being an employee of Sitecore and having equity in Sitecore, that was my I had to believe it, or I'm not sure. I looked at headless and I said, this is a problem because of these reasons. The integration is going to be a problem. And CMS is a commodity. It's a small piece of the picture. If all you have is CMS, then your customer has to do all the integration and acquire products from 15 different vendors and cobble them together. And there's no real architectural patterns to support this, where every customer has to build a custom solution, and the expense and the complexity and the maintenance, administration and everything. I had real doubts about the architecture. In addition to my kind of I work for a competitor of this industry. And then at this time I had left Sitecore. I was living in Singapore and I was working on a Sitecore project for a big company, and it was a disaster. It was a disaster because it was implemented by an advertising agency rather than by a system integrator, and it was a really complex solution. It had been oversold by Sitecore, it had been oversold by the agency, and it hadn't been resourced properly, and it was just a complete disaster. But it wasn't just that, because I had seen that scenario over and over again in our industry. But now I was suddenly responsible for this really complex Sitecore implementation that was having a ton of problems. And I realized how dangerous that monolithic application architecture can be, and the tight integration between the customer solution and the vendor solution, and just how risky that is. So then I started exploring composable a little bit more, but still had all sorts of reservations. And what was really missing from the composable space. So again, I talked about monolithic applications. In a composable application, we pick point solutions from different vendors. So one vendor will provide customer data platform, and another provides CMS, and another provides commerce, and another provides search. And we have to do custom integration between those. And we've always had integration platforms like MuleSoft and things like that, but we had no integration platform for composable architecture. It's like start from scratch, and every organization has to figure it out. And there are just so many risks and costs involved with that. So I always had reservations about composable. And then after that agency went bankrupt, I was working for another consultancy, a friend of mine, and they were looking at their Sitecore business kind of drying up, because the Sitecore market was very strong for a long time. And then after a while, the money just wasn't there anymore for a lot of the partners. And so they were looking to expand their market, and they were, okay, this headless CMS is picking up speed. So I was doing research on headless CMSs, and I started looking at content stack really closely. Like I said, headless CMS or CMS in general is a commodity. I always look for differentiating factors. And for me, content stack had differentiating factors in terms of data modeling. And so I was really interested in that. But I still saw these implementations are going to be a disaster. If you're using Jamstack and Gatsby and these kind of things to build your web solution, you're really stepping back in time. You're not using we spent 20, 25 years developing the ASP.NET application server, and we're just going to throw that away and do these composable architecture things. And so I just saw problems. If you're doing something relatively simple with composable, then I think it's viable. If you're doing something complex, you really need to be ready to make the investment. Sorry.
You're connecting all of these different, like you said, point solutions, right? And the data flows can be complex. You have to amalgamate data, rationalize it, split it out to the front end. And so there's a lot going on. So I guess if you're doing that integration kind of approach, whether even you're using something like MuleSoft, there's so many ways that you can end up with this spaghetti integration that's so difficult to manage and so brittle and difficult to develop around.
So I had real concerns about composable architecture. And if you go back to my blog post from when I was working at Content Stack, there's a diagram where I point out, like in this architectural diagram of a composable solution, there's something in the center called orchestration that is missing. We don't have composable orchestration engines. We don't have.
What would you say orchestration is versus integration? How is it not integration?
Orchestration, wow, I don't have an answer for that one off the top of my head. Orchestration is an integration conduit in a sense. I look at an orchestration engine as an operating system for composable solutions. So if I'm using Microsoft Word on my workstation, that's an application running on the Microsoft Windows operating system. And there are 14 other applications, and they're all integrated in some way. They share file systems. You can cut and paste back and forth. There's integrations between these things. And an orchestration engine is for doing the same kind of things, but for enterprise applications. So instead of desktop applications, we've got all these enterprise applications, and they're much more networked. They're not all sitting on one machine. They need to be brought together, and there are all sorts of processes of data interchange between these systems. The most common example of a composable solution is a website. So we build a website, and let's say it's a commerce website. So if I go to that website, I know there's going to be a content management system behind it and a commerce system right off the bat, and almost certainly a customer data platform. So right there are three systems, and that doesn't even include search and everything else that needs to go into that. So if I am not careful about that, then I've got each of those applications communicating with each of the other applications directly. So I've got point-to-point connections between every application in this architecture, and they're all using each other's proprietary interfaces. Yeah. And that is the real problem, because if any of those interfaces, I'm so tightly coupled. So the whole point of composable or of service-oriented architecture is to reduce the tightness of coupling, but the way we're implementing composable solutions is actually increasing the tightness of the coupling, because now so much of our custom code is tightly coupled, whereas if I have a monolithic solution, it's really just my customizations or my little pieces that are custom code, as opposed to the whole integration is custom code. So how do we mitigate that risk? How do we reduce the cost? How do we allow analysis in that kind of environment? How do we monitor these processes that are, if there is no enterprise system between commerce and web, what happens when the network fails or the packet drops or whatever it is? So there's really there's no robustness in this architecture. And so if you want to add that robustness, you really need a layer in the middle. And this works against the principles of composable architecture because it does reintroduce a sort of monolith in the middle. But now the difference is that I own that monolith. So all of my custom application logic is in one system that I control, as opposed to coupled tightly with various vendor products. I know I'm not making the best explanation of.
No, I'm getting it. Let me see if I can kind of rephrase. I mean, there's, especially on the enterprise level, all of these different points and the architecture between them. And by the way, those people who are listening who just think creating an enterprise system is about development. Development is the small commodity bricklaying part of the thing. There's the how do I want to live conversation you have with your architect, who's got to think about how all the pieces fit together, from how you live in your living space to your plumbing and electricity and bricks and structural integrity. And that's what architects do. So now, instead of finding some new way every time to do all of these integrations with their proprietary interfaces, you're looking at providing something, and you say own it in the two senses. I mean, that you can have control over it, but also you're doing this piece, this orchestration piece, Orchex, in an open source sort of way. And why that way, and how does that lend itself better to supporting this composable operating system that you're looking for? And Drazen, I saw your hand was up, but we can, if you still want to ask your question after John riffs on this, you can do that. Go ahead, Jim.
So the tight coupling is the real problem. If I'm an enterprise and I tightly couple my custom solution to a vendor's product, then that vendor has lock-in and they can change pricing and do other things that really put me at a disadvantage. An additional risk is, what if that vendor goes out of business? And this is especially on SaaS products. If I've implemented an enterprise solution that depends on 4 SaaS products and it's custom code, and one of those SaaS products goes out of business, then I'm at a serious risk, or I have a lot of work to do. And so how do we mitigate those kind of risks? And so this also comes up in the context of SaaS. So if you trust your SaaS vendors, then you can do SaaS. But I think we've proven that we can't always trust SaaS vendors. There are major cloud outages. Everybody sees their SaaS pricing getting manipulated. SaaS is not really the solution to everything. And it doesn't give us a fallback plan. So if I have implemented my custom solution on SaaS and something goes wrong, how do I move that on-prem? How do I get it out of the cloud and get it back to something that I can manage and control? And that's why one of the reasons that I think open source is critical for this core organizational infrastructure for enterprise is because whether the orchestration engine is running on SaaS or locally, I don't really care. I want a single interface to that application. I want to be able to move it between containers, but I don't really want to care about the hosting. But if my SaaS orchestration vendor fails, I absolutely need to be able to move that product in-house without making fundamental changes to that. And the only really viable approach to that is open source. There really is. 90% of software vendors fail within the first 10 years. So if you build your enterprise on 10 software products, you're going to have a lot of challenges. So trying to reduce that risk, and that would be the reason for open source. Yeah. I'd love to have more time to but I'd like to get to Drazen's question.
I think Drazen was saying he has to drop. He might have already dropped off. He was making, I think, perhaps saying goodbye or making a comment on that. I will anticipate one thing perhaps that Drazen would talk about, and maybe another benefit of this open source approach too, aside from giving the organization the confidence that they can own it in the sense that they have control, and if they're not dependent on, they're not locked into a vendor, they can take that on. They're not dependent on that SaaS vendor if they don't want that. There's also the benefit of, because it's open source, we can get a lot of more learnings from a lot of more different people into the mix, rather than somebody in their ivory tower making decisions for everybody, which I think is another huge benefit for that. We have about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to say that on that front, on that everybody making those contributions, and I'll make a plug for Orchex in this case. Let me change my hat. Hold on one second. I'm going to change my hat here. I got my Orchex hat on. So now I got my Orchex on. That contributions, and even in terms of exposure to problems. So if you are facing this challenge, you're going to architect your composable enterprise solution, the XP parts, the other parts that need to feed into that. Those are challenges that the Orchex team, Drazen, John, and so forth, are also looking forward to. So reach out. Happy to have conversations with you about how you architect those things. Maybe there's things already in the tank that we've been working on that can be of benefit. Maybe there's problems that you have that can help to make the platform better. So we are looking for contributors. We're looking for opportunities to consult with you on those things as well. So that I do want to make that concrete call, and especially the vendor partners that are out there, because you are providing many of these points here, and it'd be great if we understood how best to work with you. So do get that word out. It's at orchex.org. There's a little contact form on there as well. But before we get wrapped up, I want to give one more chance for folks to ask a question. You can take yourself off mute and ask the question. And John, perhaps for you to let us know what you think the future of the platform is. What do you want to happen next for the platform?
I'm going to just jump in here.
Yeah.
John, you're resonating with me on multiple levels. I do customized software development. I started off just as you did, programming on a Commodore 64 back in the day, learning machine code, but it is a real point for custom integrations. I'm dealing with one customer right now. They've got a fleet tracking software that they use, but it doesn't do customer management. So they want to do callbacks, and trying to get the data out of the vendor is like pulling teeth. They've gone monolithic. They've gone to this place where it's very now more from the technology point of view to their marketing and sales and getting more customers on board. And they really do not care about the customer themselves. And so my customer is now having major issues just getting data out. And as much as we tie things in, then they change things. And then you're like, then I get the stick that my software solution is broken, and if those sorts of things, you really do, this composable orchestration really sounds good, but then how do you get the vendors out there to buy in to the technology? What's your plan or vision, and how you get them to see the savings, the capacity for more return on investment? How do you see that moving forward?
I think it's going to take time. I wish we had another hour for this conversation, but it's going to take time. And it's not necessarily going to be driven by the vendors. It's going to have to be driven by the community. And I think that what we're trying to do at Orchex is start that movement. And this also relates back to the EDI stuff where we had standards. And right now we don't have any standards for data formats, for API endpoints, for anything. And so we've lost huge value in our industry by not having standards. And so what I'm hoping is that we get a community effort around Orchex or something like Orchex, where we start developing these adapters for the different business systems. So one of the things that we do with Orchex is we try and look at it from a domain-driven development perspective. So instead of saying, I need a commerce solution that integrates with commerce tools and content stack, we look at it as, I need a website that has commerce and web. And so look at that problem, implement the solution in the orchestration engine to meet that use case, and then adapt it to those specific vendors' products, so their flows and things like that. So if we can implement, we need to build the community around Orchex or something like Orchex. Orchex is just an idea. It's not, I'm not saying that this is the one and only. It's just, we need to do something. We need to start something to address this problem space, or else we're just creating all of these applications that are going to be very brittle for the long term.
And I'll just in closing, too, and Zach has also raised the point about adapters or plugins, as he put it. Orchex creates the opportunity for people to do that. It creates the opportunity for vendors to work with us on those things. But John, to the point in closing, this is the kind of thing that only we as professionals, digital professionals, can do. It's not something that the traditional commercial enterprise can do because they're not suited for it. And the strategic kind of alignment with composable and open source and something that's contributed by the community and something like early days of Sitecore that grew because of the community is really at the heart of this. It's at the heart of what we're doing at the DX Alliance. It's at the heart of what Orchex or something like Orchex. And it's just like you to say that doesn't have to be my thing as long as it gets done. But the one thing that is for sure is it only happens if all of us, if we work together to make it happen. And I guess I'll just go back to my line again in closing, that we got to keep showing up for each other. And if you want to show up for the Orchex journey, be there, help us make it better. It'll probably help you with your challenges with your enterprise orchestration and composable as well. And then we'll have something that will make our lives as individuals, because companies come and go, organizations come and go. At the end of the day, it's only us here. So let's keep showing up for each other. I want to thank you, John. It's been a great conversation. I wish we had another hour. Maybe when you're done gallivanting around Laos and Asia and Cambodia and the world, you can. That's why I normally put a flag on people's profile when I do the promo. With John, I knew I had to just put a little globe on his thing and just call him a human. So off you go. Where's next for you now, John?
Flying to Laos tomorrow.
Flying to Laos tomorrow. They're lucky to have you, and we'll look forward to having you back again. And maybe we can continue the conversation and get more into some of the architectural nitty-gritties and things like that. But thank you so much, John, and thank you everybody for showing up. And
thanks.